in that experience as a hospice volunteer, it can't not filter into what you value, what you want, what's important to you, how you show up for your family, how you show up for your community. Because you realize time is finite. All we have ultimately is each other. And thank God, that's awesome. That's a beautiful thing to learn. And if you learn it and you embrace it and you're open to it and you go, yeah, that's wonderful. It shows up in how you, stand in the line at the grocery store, how you drive your car, how you interact with your colleague. And for me, it's about the ultimate story when people say, how do you do this work still after so long? Why do you do it? It's because the moments with people, and literally moments, minutes, moments, time for me becomes so rich and valuable that it's not just a conversation. I'm looking at you, I'm hearing you, I'm seeing you, I'm feeling you. And we've maybe only chatted for 10 seconds, but it's the richness of an experience, and the way I show up in moments with people is just so beautiful now. And I say this with confidence. I always say, if I was gone tomorrow, I feel I've lived a lifetime because of the investment in that time with people. And it was such a good lesson to learn earlier in my life. I was a young mom when I started this work, and I'm really grateful that that lesson showed up at that point in my life, because it's only deepened now, and I just am so grateful. Yeah. So to live, the moments are just there for you to dive into and embrace.
Welcome to Inspiring Heartfelt Conversations. My name is Barbara Morningstar. This series is presented by In Autumn's Cocoon, which offers end-of-life awareness in the form of talks, workshops, and writing. For more information, you can go to inautumnscocoon.com. Today, my guest is Lindsey Willis. She is the Executive Director for Ridge Meadows Hospice and a senior member of the BC Hospice Palliative Care Association Federation of Fraser Region Hospice Societies. She has worked in end-of-life, palliative care, and grief support for over 15 years in her community, and holds a psychology degree from University of British Columbia. She has a contagious passion, which is why we have her on the show today, for speaking of the meaningful impact of hospice volunteering. She is honored to have trained and worked alongside hundreds of volunteers who are integral members of the hospice palliative care and grief support teams. Lovely to have you today, Lindsey.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you.
And I want you all to know this is a beautiful woman, both inside and out. So we're in for a treat today. We get to explore this topic with her.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we're going to start simply by, not everybody understands what a hospice volunteer is, the role of the hospice volunteer. So can you explain that to us?
And I'm not surprised that people don't know that. It's always being in the field and working in the field, you assume one would know. But until that story touches your story, of course you wouldn't know what a hospice volunteer is. So who they are and their role. So who a hospice volunteer is somebody who comes alongside another person in their journey through a life-limiting illness, through a death, and through grief. And how that looks primarily of a hospice volunteer is listening and presence. Their role is, I always say, I would think we were chatting about this, Barbara, it's the most simple thing that we ask of people, to just be and be present and listen. But in that, the complexity is so rich of how that looks and how it shows up. So in practice, they are members of our community. They are people who have had experiences in these stories or not. So people who want to come to do this work, I just say probably from a deep sense of compassion and wanting to serve their community. They come to a hospice society typically and take a pretty solid 30-hour training to do the work, and then realize that they are such an integral member of this larger hospice palliative team that serves patients and families. So their role primarily is to be present, to listen, and provide emotional support to people who are experiencing life-limiting illness through that death and through grief, how long as that is.
Okay, so I started as a hospice volunteer like over 30 years ago, and you started as a hospice volunteer. Can you kind of tell me, not just kind of, can you tell me what the gifts have been for starting in the purity of that role before going into a professional, because you're in professional roles now. What was the gift of learning from that perspective before moving into the professional roles?
Lovely. I value deeply starting in that role, and I'm truly proud of that and grateful for it. I can't, dare I say this? Yeah. I can't imagine now being in this position of leadership in the capacity I am without having that role. And that role brought me to who I am now and how I show up with staff and families and patients and my community and my supporters. So starting as a hospice volunteer, we would say, were you looking for this role or did it find you? I believe now in my gut that role found me. Yeah. And it was a matter of going through a significant loss, and within days opening the newspaper and seeing an ad for hospice volunteers. The newspaper was there, an ad for hospice volunteers. So serving as a hospice volunteer for, I'm going to say 2.5 years, and then evolving into the palliative coordinator here at our hospice society for a good 10 years, and then evolving to this role. So that role as a hospice volunteer, I think for myself, I always worked in community services, supporting families, children, outreach services, but there was something missing. There was a depth to the work that was missing from me, and I knew that. And becoming a hospice volunteer, it was like coming home. It was one of those, okay. And knowing without a doubt in my heart and my soul and my gut that that's where I was to be. And hospice volunteering taught me, it's hospice 101. You are privy and allowed and privileged to go into homes, to go into a hospice, to go into long-term care, to have people come to you. So the richness of the experience, it's just the training ground where you get exposed, fortunately, to so many stories and so many people. So that can't help but enrich my work now. And and especially supporting volunteers. That's the piece. We have such a, I can't say enough, and it's hard to find the words, but such a rich volunteer base here at the Ridge Meadows Hospice Society, people who stay with us for 10, 15, 20 years. And what I've learned, because I learned as a hospice volunteer, how important that support is for those people. It's not like you train them up and go, woo, yeah, get in there, get in there. That ongoing support and connection and training and checking in and honoring the work they do, because it's difficult work. We all recognize that it's difficult, but with the support of that team, it's a lot easier. So that has landed hard as a lesson for me to support my staff, our volunteers, as I was supported and wanted to be supported. Mm-hmm.
Well, and the authenticity the role invites you into about life itself. I mean, everything is stripped away at end of life and in grief. So do you want to speak to that a little bit too?
Yeah. I think that is part of the appeal, part of the for volunteers. And again, hard to articulate and express that. But when you're coming alongside folks at that point in their life, I can hear myself saying in the training, it's not only time, it's not because there's not a lot of time, but it's what is important and what is real and raw is there so evidently with people. And when you come into a room, it's not, and I'm saying a hospice room or being present, it's not, oh, hello, Bill, and oh, you work where, and oh, great. And it's this almost immediate connection where this person now in turn is telling you what they loved, what they're losing, what they dreamt for, what they wanted, what they still want. And that just comes. And I think it's the sense of trust that I'll say that to volunteers is that connection develops such a quick, beautiful sense of trust between two people that it creates that space almost instantaneously where you get through all the blah and get to that person in their heart. And yeah, so the stripping away happens quickly and magically and allows space for those folks to just explore with us whatever they need.
Mm-hmm. And in turn for your authenticity to be seen and respected and honored. I know that's one element of it that I found truly profound is like people, me seeing them, but being felt seen because of where they were in their life in a deep way. It was kind of a mutual, wasn't the intent, but feeling it in a mutual kind of deeper connection in the quiet of moments, even if there was nothing spoken.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, and how did that flow out into your own life then, being a hospice volunteer? Did it bring a different perspective to life itself?
Yeah, again, I've said to volunteers, if you're doing it right, it can't help but not. And what is the doing it right? The doing it right is just investing fully and going for it and being there. So in that experience as a hospice volunteer, it can't not filter into what you value, what you want, what's important to you, how you show up for your family, how you show up for your community, because you realize time is finite. All we have ultimately is each other. And thank God, that's awesome. That's a beautiful thing to learn. And if you learn it and you embrace it and you're open to it and you go, yeah, that's wonderful. It shows up in how you, stand in the line at the grocery store, how you drive your car, how you interact with your colleague. And for me, it's about the ultimate story when people say, how do you do this work still after so long? Why do you do it? It's because the moments with people, and literally moments, minutes, moments, time for me becomes so rich and valuable that it's not just a conversation. I'm looking at you, I'm hearing you, I'm seeing you, I'm feeling you. And we've maybe only chatted for 10 seconds, but it's the richness of an experience and the way I show up in moments with people is just so beautiful now. And I say this with confidence. I always say, if I was gone tomorrow, I feel I've lived a lifetime because of the investment in that time with people. And it was such a good lesson to learn earlier in my life. I was a young mom when I started this work, and I'm really grateful that that lesson showed up at that point in my life because it's only deepened now, and I just am so grateful. Yeah. So to live, the moments are just there for you to dive into and embrace. And
so let's just get into a little bit more around the training, because this isn't just somebody saying, I want to be a volunteer, and then they're thrown into the thing. This is because we're dealing with vulnerable people and their families and in grief, like an end of life. So, there's screening involved, and then there's deep material and mentoring after. So can you talk about, who might be right and how you screen and how you're taking people through the training and then follow through with mentorship as they enter into the work. You speak to a little bit of that.
Yeah, for sure. And it is a process. We'll get calls or just connections, people going, oh, I'd love to volunteer. And, can I start? Like, ooh, sit down because I'm going to have a little story. But it's because of the importance of the work and what you just said. The piece, in what role does one have the chance and privilege to come along people at such a vulnerable point in their life? And that is the importance of it, that the effect one can have in those moments is so profound that you need to be ready for those moments. And yes, we're compassionate. Yes, we're empathetic. Yes, we all show up like that. But then how do we really drill those traits down so when they show up as a hospice volunteer, they are serving that person fully? So how it is a wee bit of a process that one would reach out to us or a hospice society in general. There's an initial interview, which is quite a personal interview, asking about their own experiences with death and dying, grief and loss. Because again, if you can't articulate or reach into that or touch that in your interview, and we would be curious. It's not a no, it's just we would be curious what that means for you. So the interview process is quite personal. Yes, screening, criminal record checks, reference checks, that entire check piece so that we're safe. And then the training, and hospice societies in general, in I'm going to say in BC, let's just talk BC, and definitely regionally here in the Fraser Health region. A lot of our training, it was based in the day back in the BC Hospice Palliative Care Standards. It was a beautiful binder we all got that was the original syllabus and content for the hospice volunteer training. And it's really stayed quite consistent. If you look at us, at Mission, at Abbotsford, at Burnaby, you would see a consistency in what we are teaching potential volunteers. So the content is typically 30 to 40 hours, but it's not just what is hospice palliative care? What are the signs of dying at end of life? It quickly turns, and some people are shocked and go, what did I sign up for? Into, and how did you feel at your first loss? And when you're companioning a woman who too had breast cancer like you, how is that going to show up? Because how are we going to manage that you can fully let go of your story to now be present with somebody else? And I've seen people go, what? I thought we were just learning about hospice, what a hospice was. They're like, oh, but in that, yes, you need to understand the philosophy of hospice palliative care. You need to understand how the body changes as it's dying. If you're sitting with somebody who is dying, you need to understand that grief can shift into a complex grief really quickly, and what would be the warning signs of that. So we empower and educate with the content, but then the intention of training is really to get down to your own heart. Why am I doing this work? How am I going to do this work? How will I always do this work? How do I ensure I'm here fully for another person without my experiences, my assumptions, my biases, my preconceived notions, my judgments coming up? Because that's what needs to be stripped away in training, that when I now serve somebody, I'm serving from this open-hearted place as opposed to, oh, my stuff. Because people know that quickly of how we're serving them. So the training goes over, it's in some places 3 weeks, 3 months. Once they're finished their training, we in our hospice society, we ask that they do at least 3 to 4 shifts in hospice. So in McKenney Creek Hospice, our local hospice, to get their feet wet, really practice the skills, feel the space. I always leave the door open for realizing maybe it's not a good fit for you. And that's a great realization that you may have had the intention, but you know what? Ooh, hospice doesn't feel right, but I'd love to try that grief support over there. That sounds great. I would love to learn to be a facilitator, because hospice is a bit, I don't know, just not the fit. And there's no judgment there. That's a win when a volunteer realizes their fit and their passion and where they will serve others best. So once they go through hospice, some of them will realize they want to stay there, but then the door is wide open for joining the Hospice Society in one-to-one grief support, facilitating grief groups, working in our relaxation circle, taking healing touch training, working in the community with our palliative patients. So the options are wide. And my hope is always people will find what they love to do, because then they will continue to do it and they'll find that fit. And then mentoring is never ends, and training never ends. So it's not like, once you become a hospice volunteer, and it happens vicariously and intentionally, because now I hear myself how I learn every day something to add to my practice in serving the people we serve. But we do intentionally offer ongoing training, ongoing compassion fatigue, self-care, all the beautiful pieces that now keep you sustained in your hospice volunteer role. So it's not a role that one would show up and do a shift a week and never hear from us. The family wraps around you, your team wraps around you, your palliative team is with you. I could just go on and on, Barbara. So, yeah.
Well, and as you say, people go into it. I remember taking the training initially hesitating, because I was in my early 30s when I first started. And I thought, what am I doing this for? And then as I got into the training, what came up about my own being and lost history and all of that was profound and then transformative, because it was healing to be able to go through that first, to be able to hold the space for other people, right? So I want to talk about diversity too. I've worked at 3 different hospices before starting this platform, and one of them was in just outside of Vancouver, and had such a range of diverse cultures, religions, belief systems. So speak to the fact a hospice society really is meant to be embracing, honoring, celebratory of whatever your belief, culture, skin color, sexual orientation, whether you're an atheist or agnostic, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And you get volunteers from all different walks of life. Can you speak to the piece of diversity?
Oh, I love that. Yeah. I think there may be I think there may be an old school assumption sometimes that hospice societies may just be connected with a faith group, whatever that is. So there's already sometimes that assumption in the community, or that wondering is that, are they connected to a faith group? So hospice societies are not. Hospice societies are nonprofit charitable organizations that serve a community, and a community in however that presents. So for us here, it's interesting to watch where I see it the most is in our training and how that's evolved. So when I may have started teaching the training 15 years ago, there were, on the night on spirituality and religion, there were columns on what families in Islam, Muslim, Jewish families, Catholic families, Buddhist families would want. And it would tell us in bullets what they would want. And so I studied that well, and I learned that well along Catherine Calzavara, our spiritual care practitioner, educated myself on what they would want. And you soon realize that just because one is Catholic, sacrament may not be important to them. Just because one used to attend this church they don't need that pastor coming now. Just because they were engaged in their faith, now they don't want to be. So it's evolved for us, and this will go for diversity in all its beautiful forms. However you present when you come through that door of our hospice society is how you present, and you will tell us what that means to you. So it's really deepened for us that if you have a faith practice, your sexual orientation, you're exploring this, you want to learn more about that, You tell me what that means to you, and then I will in turn support that. I'm not going to assume just because A, B, and C, this is how we show up to support you. So I love that. I love that approach. And it has served us well here that when that door opens to our hospice society, there's almost a wall of palpable wall where people go, it feels good in here. It feels good because the arms are open. And so in that, though, may I say, I don't want to just say whatever goes. We have a concerted effort, and actually in our strategic plan in this next couple of years, to set up, what were we going to call it? A panel, to basically a panel in our community to, again, reach out to those different ethnic groups, different faith groups, and say, hey, we're here. I know it may not always fit with what you do in your practice, a hospice society, but when and if you have somebody in your group that wants to access our services, here we are. My goal is that everybody in this community, and I say Maple Ridge Meadows, in our community, and everybody knows we exist, because when and if you want us, we are here. And some people will never want us because they've got a wonderful, rich, beautiful group around them in whatever capacity that it is that supports them through their death and dying. But when and if you want hospice society support, that's part of the mission. So I don't know if that's explaining it, the diversity piece, but on our volunteer team too, and there's a stereotype that, okay, let's just call it out, that it's a bunch of little old ladies volunteering on the hospice society volunteer team. That's the assumption. Fair enough. No. You look at our last class, there were people in their 20s, their 30s, there were men, there were women, and which is so valuable because when you are that person needing support, we don't call it a matching service per se, but some people feel more comfortable because of their life experiences speaking to somebody their own age, speaking to somebody of their own gender, speaking to somebody who maybe is more similar, and we get that. So it's nice to have this diverse group of volunteers that you can, when the time comes, go, hey, young Amir, who's 25, maybe this young guy in hospice who's 35 and really struggling might feel better chatting with you than with, little old Lindsey. So that's what that team needs to have that richness to it too.
Right. Yeah. Well, I know one of my longest roles was this program director in a city outside of Vancouver that is so ethnically and multicultural. It felt like stepping into the United Nations every day with all the different religions and languages. And like you, it's fascinating because it teaches you so much. And everyone is a culture within themselves that has to be honored. Then within the family culture, which may be aligned or diverse, and then within their community, right? So it's layered in how you so beautifully have shared. They walk in and you lean in and listen to hold space to hear what that actually means for them, not what the textbook tells you it might be, right? So
you put your foot in your mouth. I've done that, and as a young whippersnapper, I've done that, and you learn quickly again not to assume, and just never assume, because part of the piece, like you're saying, is serving of the hospice palliative care philosophy is the family as a unit of care, and a family defined by, again, whatever that is to you. Maybe you and your puppy, you and your grandma, you and your blended family, whatever that family unit. But in that family unit, again, if you come from a strong religion or faith or culture, even those two people present differently in what they need. So it's just so much more valuable as somebody serving that person to have a visit and hear their story, hear what it means to them, and then go from there.
How do you work with the volunteers as they go through transitions like that? Or how did you find your own way of integrating the volume of death and grief that you're going to be witness to? So I don't want to say it becomes normal because it's never normal. Well, it is normal in the scheme of life.
Yeah.
But just speak to me on your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's interesting the words you used, the volume of death. That felt, when you said that, that impact felt big to me. That's, again, just reminding ourselves. Okay, so for hospice volunteers, and this is part of the training, but until you experience, and it's specifically that part you're saying, Barb, about going from one room to another. I just said this to somebody the other day, when I am walking up to hospice, I remind myself every time what I'm going to do. I can't recall many times that I've opened that door and walked in like, okay, going out of the hospice. There's always an intentional pause at that door, feet on the ground. I'm walking into sacred ground. I'm walking into people's stories, just to remind yourself that. That alone, and teaching the volunteers to do that in between patient rooms, in between heavy visits, in between interactions in the hallway, teaching them from the beginning to take those pauses in between people and stories. And maybe that's as much as, again, just breathing 3 times, going to the washroom, washing your hands. But that reset in between becomes part of their self-care, becomes integral to the work they do. Because then, again, you are honoring the patient and families the best by not walking into the next room with 5 stories on your back and going, I'm heavy, I'm not feeling present. Those need to go somewhere, for now I'm here again. So how do you constantly honor a story, an experience, and then go to the next room, go to the next room, go to your grief group that night? And we ask that it becomes a practice. We ask and teach that it becomes a practice of understanding that role so completely that you're going to come alongside for a brief moment in this huge story, serve that story with love and let it go. And it's until that happens, though, and that you're seeing, again, the volume of death. I was with our new staff person just a couple days ago in hospice, and what were we doing? Rearranging furniture, and heard a woman wailing in the room, just sobbing. And her husband had just died. And the nurse poked her head out and said, "Can you pop in here, please, somebody, and just sit with her while I go do something?" So our new staff person went into that space, and I knew that's the first time she's going to be with a patient in this hospice who had died, a person who is dead. And I was mindful. And when she came out, just having that, again, moment to, what was that for you? How was that? How did that feel? How did it look? How did you feel? And I was so proud of her and her ability to articulate it. But it's not, gosh, if those moments are lost on you as a volunteer, as a staff person, that is a person who died. That's a person who died. And the person who loved the most in the world is sitting there with them. That can't become normal. That it becomes expected and part of your work, but it's not normal. Every story is new. Every experience is new. Every person who lives and dies in that hospice is unique, and they have their own beautiful story. So, it's just again, I feel almost shivers in my legs. The profoundness of the work needs to be acknowledged and talked about and shared with each other as team members to keep doing that work.
Well, and it's very different from, the theory of something in the head. And you need information to hold a container and make it safe and be aware. But then there's the humanity. It shakes down into your heart and being. And, in the 1800s, when we didn't have all the scholarly ways of learning, the people would look for the person in the community who had a life wisdom, a sensitivity, an inner grace and compassion to be present in those moments, because they were, both the had both the life experience and awareness and the wisdom to hold the space, but also a grace, the heart, and compassion to lead the energy and the presence in the room and in that moment for each person that was there.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. So that leads in beautifully to my next question, because we're especially in COVID, and so there's a blessing to me, like you, that I started, even though I'm not in a formal professional role right now. Like you, I started with this deep training that was what brought me into my humanity and my heart, and then worked me up to being with this. But we're hearing in COVID, medical staff being overwhelmed by the, being in ICU and the deaths that were happening, and taking a breath and how to integrate it. So how does the presence of the hospice volunteer enhance the overall functioning of the palliative and hospice and grief and bereavement teams?
What a beautiful question. That's great. Yeah, so that is we could sit for hours on that one. And never was it ever, again, shone a light on so brightly as during that pandemic. When overnight, that hospice volunteer team, the programs, the relationships, the connections with that larger hospice palliative care team was gone. Physically on site, where we had to step out of our hospice as volunteers and as staff and serve the hospice from afar on iPads and Zoom and phone calls the best we can from windows. We did the best we could. But then you realized that, again, this team that functions with nurses and physicians and social workers and pharmacists and spiritual care and volunteers, this beautiful team that functions when we were not allowed to be together and support each other, you really realized the pieces that were missing. And what we heard from our nursing staff and our medical staff on the unit was not only the patient care that we provided, and I mean emotionally patient care that the hospice volunteers provided, but that sense of connection and team for the nursing staff. Definitely our nurses. In some hospices, higher volume of nursing staff. In ours, typically 2 nurses on RN, LPN, a PCC, but the reliance, that natural reliance that evolved on volunteers, where you could turn to Romana and say, can you please sit with the gentleman in 133? He's getting short of breath, his anxiety is up. You could turn to Linda and go, there's a new family arriving. I'm working on dinner over here in this room. Can you show them around? So that piece was gone. So our nurses were stretched and are stretched without that hospice palliative team, volunteer team working alongside them in the hospice. For themselves, emotionally, to be able to turn to a volunteer when they come out of a room where maybe that death did remind them of their dad 20 years ago. And there it was, I've worked in this hospice for a long time, but that moment got me to be able to see, again, somebody in the hallway goes, wow, that was a rough one. Hey? Yeah, it was. Whew. That alone, with that volunteer, that's the reset and allows them to keep going into that next space. But that, was really lost. And it's taken a while to rebuild that piece, because when the team was gone, our volunteer team, leadership changes, pieces change, nurses change. So when a hospice society reintegrates into the larger home health team, palliative team, hospice team, there were people now who are going, what do you do? Who are you? What does this little hospice society do? And it was like, So the re-education piece and developing these relationships, because that's all it's about, is the relationship. Once we have a relationship with that manager, with that PCC, with that nurse, they know when and how to call us. And the value of having the volunteers supporting not only them, but their patients and families. And oh my gosh, what was that piece of synergy that you sent me a clip on, and it was in music, but the creative force that happens when different professions, different entities come together, and the new beautiful force that's created, the creative force. I love that. And that was missing for a wee bit during the pandemic. And it's beautiful to see it coming back. I'm pretty proud of everybody.
Well, and going back to like when I would interview Dr. Belford Mound, who's a pioneer in palliative medicine and coined the term palliative care, both in his book and in the interview, he really honored the hospice volunteers as integral members and was profoundly, taken away by the depth of training, which helped them to come in with a presence that was enhancing. And even sometimes volunteers seeing things that, the staff may not have had the time to be present to a patient, were able to observe and add to the care overall, right? So
where I'm thinking, Barbara, where I see that often is in hospital. So when people are dying on acute units in our hospital, and they are not going to come to hospice for whatever reason, that nursing team, again, what I'm trying to rebuild here in our community is the minute that's happening, there is a volunteer who has been trained for hours who wants to be there bedside with that person. They signed up for this. They want that phone call. And how simple is it for that unit clerk to go boop, boop, Hospice Society, connect, volunteer to be with that person. And not only does it serve the person who is dying and their family to have that support in the room, that nursing staff running up and down the hallway who are exhausted, who are overstretched, and they hear the call bell. It breaks your heart because they hear the call bells, and they can't always get there. So to know that there's a team out here that can help you now in turn feel better, that you've found a resource for your patient, and you now go, okay, they're supported, onwards, here I go to do my beautiful nursing work. That is, again, if I have one mission in this community before I leave the world, that would be it, that it becomes an instinct that a nursing team knows when they have people dying around them, they can access hospice volunteers.
Well, I just did a blog titled Acres of Diamonds, and with the metaphor of at our feet, there's sometimes gems and gifts that we don't even see, and that are more profound than ever, and reflected on the volunteers as being like acres of diamonds, and a resource that I often feel, like you say, is underutilized, but so present in there if they just open their eyes and got creative into how to work with the hospice societies and the teams, like within the context of end of life and palliative care, they're known, but it can flow over into other areas of medicine when team is struggling. An example is vigils, when people the family can't be there when the person is imminently dying, or they're in an extended care facility or in a different part of the hospital, and volunteer vigil teams are called in, and they basically just sit in silent presence. Sometimes engagement, but often when a person is cocooning in and dying, they're not talking, but it's just, if it's asked for. Some people want to die alone. I want to make that really clear. You never force that on anybody, but you can sit next to that person with just a human, loving presence, and it makes a difference. I've had volunteers in turn say just the silence alone in that transition changed them, because the air in the room had a depth that was profoundly transformative for them as well. Right? So.
One of the easiest vigils I ever arranged was Christmas Eve. And it was, you're all leaving the office at 12 o'clock, watching the clock, ready to go home on Christmas Eve, and the phone rang. So the hospital needed a vigil. We have a patient dying up in 301, we have vigil support. But yep. So in the email, I didn't say, hey, everyone, I know it's Christmas. I just said, there's a patient on da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da. dying. They had indicated they didn't want to be alone. Go. And within hours, 8 p.m. to midnight, midnight to 4 a.m., 4 a.m. to 8 a.m., 8 a.m., around that clock, those 4-hour shifts. Easiest shift to ever fill. And nobody said it's Christmas. Nobody said, oh, it was, may I go? Can I go? Yes, I'll go. Please let me go. So yeah, it was beautiful. I'll never forget that one.
Mm-hmm. Well, and as it should be in history, we died at home and gave birth at home, and the community rallied around when somebody was ill or dying just to help each other. And that's a beautiful reflection of it as well. Okay, I just want to gently shift in and change track a little bit here. And as we were prepping for this, we haven't talked in a number of years, and I was not aware until we spoke that you personally have gone through an interesting life transition and were diagnosed with cancer a while back and have since come through that experience. So I feel it's really important, and you beautifully agreed to open that conversation. Could you tell us what if you, to the extent that you're comfortable sharing, the diagnosis and what you went through and how that's changed you in this work?
Big question.
Yeah, big question.
Yeah.
And we can spend a whole podcast on this. So please understand, I'm more than aware that this is a longer conversation.
Mm-hmm. No,
but I just invite you to share whatever feels appropriate around that at this time in your life and the work you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, and may I preface it with, and vulnerably I say, I'm a pretty private gal. I love talking about my work, my family, my experiences. Talking about hospice, I will do with you all day long. When it comes to talking about Lindsey and her experience, it's still new to me. And that's a really interesting lesson, just even reflecting on meeting today, to talk about my experience going through that health. Look, I can't even say it. Going through a cancer experience is still new to me in talking about. So I said to myself, you know what? Go for it. Take a chance, because I'm with you. I care and love you and trust you well. And yeah, so basically, gosh, and it hasn't been long. It was 2020, perfect timing and moving into the pandemic. And I'd always had pain in my hip and my groin, like it's significant pain. And I was pretty athletic and strong my whole life. So we thought it was arthritis. And it was an incidental finding on a arthritis bone scan for my hand that my hip lit up. And we discovered it was a chondrosarcoma, a low-grade chondrosarcoma. So a very common bone cancer. Of all the bone cancers, it's one of the most common. And I always say, if I was to get a bone cancer, that was the one you wanted, a low-grade chondrosarcoma. So learned of that diagnosis, and then quickly within 4 months had a surgery. So chemotherapy, radiation don't do well with a cartilage tumor. So it was a surgical treatment. And it was a significant surgery that happened in April of 2021 to remove the bone from my pelvis. So that happened quickly. So now I look back and go, why didn't I think about this more, deal with it more? Because it was almost like, again, the processing was, this happened, 3 months from now we're having surgery, and then all of a sudden it was gone from my body. And then there was the moment of imagining, did I even ever have cancer? It's gone. And so that processing of living with the word and how it showed up in my body, everything happened so quickly. And I compare it again to a diagnosis. When things happen so quickly that your mind almost doesn't have a chance to catch up. You just go through the motions. Yes, let's do this. And for me, it was information seeking. It was reading scans over and over, Googling words, wanting more information than less. So since that major surgery to remove the bone tumor, I've had multiple surgeries since. So I've had 3 other surgeries since, 3 total, and I'm facing another one now in the end of November because there have been significant complications, not on the tumor side, but in fractures and nerve damage and stuff like that. So once the cancer was gone, my body was still compromised, and my heart and my mind. So going through that to this point, honestly, you believe you're a compassionate person, you believe you are doing the work deeply. It's mind-boggling and still not quite understandable for me how much it has deepened the work that I do with people who are living with life-limiting illness. Thank everything that mine is not. Mine will be a cancer that rarely spreads, rarely recurs, rarely. It is gone from my body and on I go. However, the word alone, going to a cancer agency, going every 6 months for those scans of my lungs, I know what they're looking for in my lungs because I've sat with people who have those things in their lungs that now mean it's not good. I understand that a lot richer. When I go to that cancer agency and I'm sitting with people in a waiting room, I just want to go sit right beside them, sit close to them. There's such a sense of connection and community because it's just you're not alone. Cancer will affect 1 in 2, 2 out of 5 different stats of us. Yeah, and one of the things I always said in training was, again, things like when you're in a lineup at Save On Foods or somewhere, you know that of those 10 people, 1 has had somebody die. 1 is finding out they are not going to live long. 1 is missing their mom from when they are 3. It is just, and then I felt like, man, and 1 of them has been diagnosed with a chondrosarcoma. I am one of them. So it was this sense now of when I look around at people, it just deepens the human connection to each other. And the work I do looks slightly different in my intentionality of being present with people, because I know what it's like to have healthcare providers alongside me who were present and looked at me as Lindsey, as opposed to the next person under this X-ray machine, the next person in this CT machine, the people who
feeling seen, the ones really behind their eyes and seeing you.
Totally. And that made all and makes all the difference for me in this journey is the people who see it and are willing to sit with you in it and are present with it, from the volunteers who've supported me to physicians to surgeons. And I want to be that deeper for the people I support. Oh gosh, those moments are so important in how people feel seen and then in turn can heal. Whatever that is, coming to wholeness, recovering from a cancer, just feeling stronger in their self, whatever that is, that healing, it's deepened my desire to be present for folks in that process. Yeah, big time.
Mm. Deeply touching. Mm. Again, another level of life experience, bringing you into an even more profound, authentic place within your own heart and being, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the things we hear a lot about, on people's deathbeds, and it's now coming out in books and things, we don't often hear people talking about their work or where they traveled or how much money they had, even though that comes into the story. The big part is relationships. So how you're married with children, mm-hmm. How did this impact, refine, deepen, whatever? I'll let you speak to it, the relationships with your children, husband, and those closest to you.
I think I'm still learning and exploring that. With our children, it's interesting. With our oldest daughter the other day, we were on the couch. And I said to her, did I ever say I had cancer to you? She went, huh? I said, did I use that language much? She's like, no, Mom, you said you had a bone tumor, a bone tumor. And I quickly realized that I lapsed into that mode as a mother, as a mom, to not, even though I have sat with countless human beings in front of me saying that children need to know what they make up in their mind is worse than what you tell them. I've had those conversations with countless people. When it came to my own little people who are young adult women, yeah, that natural need to step back. You don't need the full story.
Mother bear, you're a mother bear protecting, right? Wow.
And I know better. Do I? I have to then go gentle with myself and go, Lindsey, it's okay. You did the best you could with those girls at the time. And you did what you felt was right, knowing them. And you got to forgive yourself almost because, yeah, it's interesting that piece. And with my dear husband, man, we've been together since we were babies, he was my heart in grade 6. And we've grown up together. And who would have ever imagined this part of a story? And to see somebody, in the past couple of years become the biggest rock. And for me, being somebody who is so private, even with my own husband, just, I got this, I can deal with this. The level of now connection and disclosure and sharing and turning to him with my stuff and going, this is going to be hard. I don't want another surgery in 3 weeks. I'm scared of how it's going to look. What if now I can't walk? What if now I lose this mobility? What if? And God, it's been, learning for both of us, but deepened. I'm fortunate. I've got a beautiful extended family and friends. My best friend, Robin, who, I couldn't have done it without. And God, those relationships. If that's what I got. I've got those people. I don't care what else I have in the world, but those people are what sustains me. Yeah.
Beautiful gift.
Mm-hmm.
So one final reflection on this, and then we'll move to the last few questions. So your own self-care. Mm-hmm. I include myself in this. People in these professions tend to be overgivers, wonderful at giving and a little harder at receiving at times. And I'm generalizing, but there's people in the world that need to learn how to give more. Sometimes we don't always talk about the other side, about learning how to receive. Mm-hmm. It's just as important. So for you, working hard for your own self-care and the work to begin with, and then having this, what invitation for you has it been to deepen an honoring and respect for your own self-care?
I love the word invitation. Yeah. So definitely has changed that piece, especially in my openness. The fact I'm sitting with you right now, and it's not mine alone to carry. That's the message. It's not mine alone. There are a team of beautiful people that I trained to be good listeners. I intentionally
see that.
You got a team, Lindsey. They're right there.
Right.
But intentionally saying to myself, let them in, tell them, phone them. Even with my staff, new staff to me about a week ago, I said, I need to tell you all something. I am dealing with A, B, and C. I'm feeling really scared. I'm feeling really nervous. I'm going to show up a wee different in the next month or so. And I need you to know that. That is huge for myself to say, this is how it is. And I would love some support. I would love some help. Please come on in. Just open that door and let volunteers who too had gone through their own cancer experiences, offering me their story. A lot of us here are trained in healing touch, and I'm a certified healing touch practitioner, and our volunteers work in that energy work. Lindsey, can I give you treatment? Yes, you can. And could I have another one on Friday? And could you maybe come to the hospital with me pre-surgery? And let's do that. Where before I'd be like, I'm okay, guys. I'll be good. It's just, I love that piece. So that self-care, intentionally asking for help, intentionally, and planning for it and going, I'm going to need help and I'm open to it. And I love that piece. I have a strong practice of meditation and mindfulness practice that I've always had, that I have deepened that work, doing healing touch with myself. But for me, the self-care has been opening the door to the support and to love and going, there's the healing right there. And yeah, I'm so grateful for that.
It's rich, and I'm so moved that not only it's deepening your own love and care for yourself, but also enhancing the work and the way you're serving in the world too. Sounds like all the people around you are being enriched from you going through this as well. So it's beautiful, Lindsey. And honestly, when I started by saying this woman is not just beautiful outwardly, it's inwardly, I mean that. There's a richness in you that's really quite moving to know and have the opportunity to have met and worked with, over the years in different ways. So,
and you, Barbara. Yeah, and you. Thank you.
So let's move into my favorite subject, the mystery of it all. I can't help but I'm passionate about this, but how can you not be passionate about the mystery of life and death? When a baby's born, this energy arrives and animates this little being, and then as they shift into the labor of dying and end of life, and that there's a letting go of the faculties that sort of formed that personality in life, it's having to be let go. There's all these kind of ineffable things that start moving in. Deathbed visions and dreams, and the volunteers have the time to just sit at the bedside. And often, I know for me, that book Final Gifts by Maggie Callanan and Patricia Kelly, who were hospice nurses, talking about near-deathing, where you too, I was reading that because I was sitting at the bedside and all the things they were talking about in that book were coming up. And it really helped to guide me when I was first there. So can you speak to your experience, volunteers' experience around those ineffable kind of things, the deathbed visions and dreams, and if there's a story that you feel comfortable to share without breaking confidence, I invite you to do so.
Oh, yeah. To the point, again, the original volunteer training didn't include pieces on this. So,
which is why I'm so big on it. And the doctors and papers are coming out on it now. I love it. I love that they're doing research on it and how important it is to acknowledge it, right? So
yeah, and the commonality of it, the odds are it's going to happen if you're sitting bedside with somebody. So the whole piece on near-death awareness is now part of our education and our training, again, to prepare volunteers for it and how to be present with that and how to not discount and not dismiss and not go, really? And not, but to just be with whatever that person is experiencing. And yes, countless wonderful, interesting, intriguing, fascinating stories that I could share, not only personally, but hearing from volunteers. Good grief. One of the first people I think in hospice care, you always remember the first people who died, the first grief support person, there's a lot of firsts you remember, and companioning a woman who was my age at that time, just again, a young mom at the time. And she would sit up and she would look at me and go, I am not in this world. And then close her eyes and then sit up. I am not in this world. And everything in me is going, what? What do you mean? So, and then I'm like, what did training say? Okay, just be quiet. Just listen. And then I remember some point she looked at me and it felt right. So I said, what does that mean for you? And And then she's just waving her beautiful hands and who knows, reaching for something. And I remember learning Anne and Stan Tamandel used to wonderful couple who taught about being with people in altered states of consciousness and how to match their hand motions. And I remember her reaching and I thought, maybe I should, okay. And just held her hand while she was reaching and just to be there with her. But to tell me she was not of this world, it just blew my mind. I thought, where are you? But then it doesn't matter. It didn't matter. Wherever you are, I'm here with you. You go there. I'll be here when you come back. You visit that. Come back to this bed. I'm with you. So she taught me a lot. That gal. There have been stories, especially like from Final Gifts, the metaphors of lining up, of finding passports, of going for trips, and sitting with
metaphoric language at the end of life.
Yeah, a really good friend of mine was dying. And she was talking about, and I pictured remember those red and blue block shape sorters from the 70s that we all had little kids? She was talking about getting the balls in the box. And she'd look right at me and go, I can't get they don't fit. I can't get the balls in. Okay. I'm moving the box. I can't get in it. And struggling to get her pieces in the box. And then sharing one day with me, I got the pieces in. Said, okay. And then dying soon after that. So again, who knows? Who knows what those boxes, those balls, does it matter? It doesn't to me. But she sorted it. She sorted it. And yeah, but those stories are often happening bedside with folks, articulating, they see people, articulating, they feel comforted by the presence of somebody who's died. And again, if you get the chance to have that moment, I think you're very lucky to sit with that person and experience that with them to whatever capacity you're allowed in. But the mystery will never be lost on me. The mystery, it never becomes something you go, oh yes, that again. What? Magic. It's just magic. Yeah.
Lovely. And for anyone watching this, just to bridge to what you're saying, in some of the other interviews in this series, linguist Lisa Smart specifically focused. She wrote a book, Words on the Threshold, on the language and the metaphors that happen at end of life. And it's a beautiful interview people can watch. And with Dr. Christopher Kerr, is a palliative physician at Buffalo Hospice in New York, actually doing deathbed vision and dream research too. So because so much is there, and if you're not aware of it, it can be missed, right? So I'm thrilled that it's part of your training now, and we're seeing it more and more with medical staff too, because it can deepen connection. It helps the patient, and in turn helps the family, even into bereavement, to acknowledge the dreams and visions. So, and volunteers are holders of a lot of those stories because of the time that they have to be at the bedside, right? Okay, so we're going to wrap up with the last few reflections and my signature question, and in many ways you've already answered this, so I open it to invite you to speak to anything else you might want to highlight. How have you been changed, or how has your heart been changed by this work?
Yeah, such a good question. And as you say that, I feel my heart kind of go, good feeling. But how's my heart been changed? I pictured the Grinch, that little heart, the girl, in a good way, the Grinch. But for me, and the only word I can find that is adequate is connection. That is the only word I can. That how connected I talk about myself, feel to people and experiences and the world. It's humbling beyond belief, the work. God, it's humbling beyond belief, the work, in that you realize we are, gosh, how the same we are. The universal experience of illness and grief and dying. It is the universal experience. We all do it. We all do it. And it's so humbling that in a room of 100 people, you know how connected you are, that your stories are this close to each other. And if you can recognize that sense of compassion I have for myself, my family, my community, others, it's a good place to live from. I feel joy. I feel joy waking up for work. I feel joy coming to this place, a place that holds challenging stories of death and dying and grief and loss. And how do you find joy in that? Because where there's deep sorrow, there's always deep love. There's that balance. There's that beautiful duality. So the love and the connection is what I've learned to focus on and sustains me and fills me. And yeah, God, it's a beautiful feeling to be in a place of employ that fills your heart and that you're doing the right thing.
Deeply meaningful. So are there any last thoughts that you want to share with the audience about Hospice Society, hospice volunteering, your work? I think you cover that quite beautiful, but anything else you want to share? Final thought.
I would, if I have a chance to speak to the world, the message is, if you have ever considered volunteering for a hospice society, if that is in you slightly, you were meant to do it. Go do it. Because people will come to that initial interview and say, I'll say, why do you think you're a good, what brought you here? What's the good fit? And people will go, I don't know, but I think there's something about it that is drawing me to it. For me, sometimes that's enough. I go, this is because it's such a beautiful, specialized role that I think if you're even interested in it and there's something drawing to you, to explore that and find out what that is and come take a training with the Hospice Society. Learn what the role looks like and see if it fits for you. It probably will, because you see the impact of a hospice volunteer on somebody's story and how that in turn softens, that's the only word I've ever come across that works, the story in ways that as they move through their loss and their grief, it is softened for them. And if you could do that, if you feel an inkling in you to do that work, yes, try it, go for it. I imagine you will love it. I imagine it will change your life in beautiful ways. And if you had any questions, just reach out to a local hospice society. Ask for that volunteer coordinator who's usually a superstar sitting there who's ready to sell that program to you, and it doesn't take much. So okay. I would encourage anybody to explore hospice volunteering for not only the way it will serve their community, but how it will serve yourself, that person.
Lovely. And a reminder that some hospice volunteers work with people at end of life and their families. Others work as grief and bereavement one-on-one or help facilitate grief groups. And then there's others that help in the office or do fundraising events, or maybe there's a thrift store that they need volunteers for. So there's a range of ways that you can help with a hospice society in your local community. And can you also just speak to families or individuals who might be facing a life-threatening illness? How does the Hospice Society support them?
Yeah, so a hospice society, the mandate would be to come along people with life-limiting illness through grief and loss. So that continuum, it's that huge umbrella. So people earlier, and there's a difference sometimes, and which I fully understand now, the difference between receiving a life-limiting diagnosis and just receiving a diagnosis. Mm-hmm. Where we find people are coming to us is when that diagnosis of whatever serious illness is now making that turn, it is changing, it is evolving to a life-limiting, that I know I will live with this as long as I can, as long as but people still at that point, in my experience, aren't accessing hospice society supports. I think it's the language of hospice. I really do. Sometimes wish we were called something else, I'll be honest, because that word can be threatening to people who are still exploring, adjusting to having this illness and how it's going to impact their time left in the world. But those are the people that, when and if the families we can access earlier in the journey for support, because the opposite is folks who come to us for grief support and go, what? I could have had support at this part of my story. I didn't know that. I wish I had known that a hospice volunteer could have sat with my mom with her end-stage lung cancer and talked to her and listened about her fears, her concerns, her hopes, her dreams. Geez, I wish we'd known that. I wish we'd known you had life stories, a beautiful program where you can record visually, audio, people's stories to then keep and pass on for generations. I wish we had known. So there's a lot of really great work, grief work, support work that can be done in the beginning of a life-limiting illness. And it does feel daunting and scary for a lot of folks, but even to connect with the Hospice Society earlier in that story, to just know they're there. And then as things change with the illness and as things progress, and as now we're exploring options for maybe end-of-life care, they remember, oh yeah, that Hospice Society is still there. I'll phone them. Now, how do I get into a hospice? I'm going to phone the Hospice Society. Now I've had my death. What do they have for grief support? So the dream is to be connected to that story in whatever capacity they need us from earlier on in their life-limiting diagnosis. And how would we help them? However they want us to. If it's sitting just together on a couch, being quiet, we will do that. If you want to play crib, we will do that. If you want to sit out that window and gaze and talk about your children and how much you're going to miss them, we will do that. So we, again, come alongside that story and what do you need? What do you want from us? I would say we're the buffet of support, and you pick and choose what fits for you because nothing fits for everybody.
Cool. Thank you, Lindsey. And we're recording in the greater Vancouver area, in British Columbia, Canada, and hospice societies are throughout Canada and North America and within Europe. So I really support people if you're curious. I mean, your specific website is mapleridgehospicesociety.com if they want to know something in the Ridge Meadows. I do that all the time. I make that mistake. I apologize. It's in Maple Ridge, but it's Ridge Meadows Hospice Society.
Yeah, you got it.
Stand corrected. But, if you're wanting to volunteer or just even curious about potential support in your local area, you can look in your local, I want to say phone book, but that dates me. But you can just Google your local area where the Hospice Society is and learn more information.
Yeah, you sure can.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Lindsey. I have a love for the role of the hospice volunteer because there's a purity in heart and intent in that. And it's really a profound experience. And I think it reminds us all of the essence of this time of life, that connection, presence, love, and care, and feeling seen until you take that last breath or in the pain of grief is invaluable within the life journey. So thank you for coming on today and highlighting the truth and blessing of all of that. I really appreciate you and you as a human being and the work you're doing.
Thank you. And you, Barbara. I know I value speaking with you about this because of who you are and how you so do deeply understand the role. Sometimes it's difficult to convey it to people who haven't walked that journey and don't quite understand the role of a hospice volunteer. But gosh, we're so fortunate, aren't we, to have had these experiences and continue to have them and work with people who are so open-hearted and purity. I like that word, the pureness of heart that they come to do the work with. Yeah, thank you. Any chance I get to share the message of that work with anybody, I'm on it. Privilege.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you again. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Take care.